They called me dependable. For 17 years I had maintained the life support systems of Hive Tertius, sub, level Gamma through Theta, cross-referencing repair logs against sacred maintenance protocols, verifying component replacements against approved specifications, keeping 300,000 souls breathing with precision that earned me the Cog Mechanicus commendation twice. When Engineer Tertius Malik asked me to investigate anomalous oxygen consumption patterns in sub-level Epsilon, I approached it, as I approached everything, with faith in the Omnissiah's design and certainty in my procedures. But the discrepancies led me to maintenance logs that shouldn't exist, to component replacement schedules that made no technical sense, to a pattern that suggested something worse than mechanical failure. My name is Hadrian Vex. I served as Life Support Maintenance Coordinator for Hive Tertius from 987, M41 to 0104 M42. And this is how I learned that entropy isn't what kills us. We are. The atmospheric processors hummed their eternal hymn at precisely 42 decibels, the sound I had woken to and fallen asleep to for 17 years. My HAB cell occupied a narrow cavity between coolant pipes and oxygen reclamation ducts, close enough to my work that I could reach primary station 7 within 4 minutes of any alarm. The Mechanicus believed in proximity between priest and machine. I believed the Mechanicus knew best. My day began at the 5th hour with recitation of the Litany of Ignition, spoken with my hands pressed against the cold metal of the nearest processing unit. Awaken, blessed machine, from thy slumber of efficiency. Grant unto us the breath of life, filtered and sanctified. In the Omnissiah's name, function without failure. The metal vibrated beneath my palms, plasma coils warming as systems cycled through startup protocols I had memorized but never truly understood. Understanding was for engineers and Magi. My role was maintenance, and I performed it with devotion that needed no comprehension. Breakfast arrived via pneumatic tube at exactly 17 minutes into the 6th hour Nutri, paste supplemented with iron and calcium, optimized for my metabolic requirements according to biologist calculations performed when I was 12. It tasted of nothing and everything simultaneously, the flavor of efficiency. I consumed it while reviewing the day's maintenance schedule on my data slate, fingers scrolling through repair orders with practiced ease. Atmospheric scrubber bank 17 required filter replacement. Oxygen mixing chamber 9 needed recalibration. Standard work. Sacred work. The Omnissiah provided the air, and I kept the mechanisms pure. The other maintenance coordinators called me meticulous, but they meant it kindly. Vesa in Gamma 3 would laugh and say I checked things twice that didn't need checking once, but she always asked me to verify her calculations before submitting reports. Garrick in Theta 9 moved faster than I did, completed more work orders per shift, but the engineers trusted my logs without question. I took pride in that trust. The Imperium functioned because millions like me performed our duties with absolute precision. What was devotion if not attention to detail? The temperature in the primary maintenance corridor held steady at 14 degrees. Cold enough to preserve the ancient machinery, cold enough that my breath misted when I exhaled. The walls sweated condensation from the temperature differential, water beating on rusted metal that had supported this city for millennia. Sometimes I wondered if the first tech, priests who built these systems, knew their work would sustain their descendants. 10,000 years later, the thought gave me comfort, continuity, purpose extending beyond a single lifetime. I signed in at Primary Station 7 at exactly the beginning of the 7th hour, pressing my thumb to the biometric scanner while reciting the prayer of faithful service. The servitor at the monitoring console acknowledged me with a mechanical nod, its augmetic eyes clicking as they refocused. I had named it Theta in my mind, though naming servitors violated protocol. It had been at this station longer than I had. Flesh and metal fused into eternal duty. Another 17 years, and perhaps I would join the Mechanicus properly, receive augmetics, become something more than flesh. The thought brought neither fear nor anticipation, only acceptance. Service was service, whether performed with hands or metal claws. The morning passed in ritual comfort. I replaced filters in scrubber bank 17, each one logged with timestamp and seal verification. The old filters went into the reclamation bin, their saturated media to be processed and re-purified. Nothing wasted. The Omnissiah's efficiency was perfect. I recalibrated Oxygen Mixer 9, adjusting flow rates to within 0.03% of specification. The machine spirit seemed pleased, its pressure readings steady and true. Engine Seer, Tertius Malik found me during my midday nutrient break, his red robes dusty from the lower maintenance levels. He moved with the careful precision of someone whose legs had been replaced with augmetic pistons decades ago. Each step calculated and certain. I set down my paste and stood, pressing my fist to my chest in the sign of the cog. Coordinator Vex. His voice emerged from a vox, grill implanted in his throat, stripped of emotion, but not unkind. Atmospheric consumption logs for sub-level epsilon show anomalous patterns. Oxygen usage exceeds population metrics by 7%. Investigate and report. 7%. The number scratched at my thoughts like static. Sub-level epsilon housed approximately 42,000 souls, according to the last census. 7% represented roughly 3,000 people worth of oxygen consumption. Either the population had grown unreported, or something was consuming air that shouldn't be. The Omnissiah's will. I responded, the proper acknowledgement. Malik's augmetic eyes studied me for a moment longer than necessary, servomotors whirring. You are thorough, Vex. This task suits you. He turned with mechanical precision and departed, pistons hissing softly. I finished my nutrient break and accessed the atmospheric logs for sub-level epsilon. The data, Slate displayed consumption graphs spanning the last 6 months. The anomaly was clear. A steady increase in oxygen usage beginning approximately 4 months ago, climbing gradually until the current 7% excess. Population census data showed no corresponding increase. In fact, the last census logged a slight decrease due to worker transfers to Gamma 6. The discrepancy made no sense. Oxygen consumption correlated directly to population, unless equipment was malfunctioning and venting atmosphere. But that would show as pressure loss, not increased consumption. Unless biological contamination had introduced oxygen, consuming organisms. But environmental sensors would have detected that, unless the census data was wrong. But the census was performed by the administratum, and the administratum did not make errors of this magnitude. I pulled up maintenance logs for sub-level epsilon's atmospheric systems, cross-referencing against my own records. Filters replaced on schedule. Scrubbers functioning within normal parameters. Mixing chambers calibrated correctly. Everything perfect. Everything according to protocol. Yet 3,000 people worth of oxygen disappeared into systems that reported no failures. The unease that touched my thoughts felt like betrayal of my faith. The Omnissiah's machines did not lie. The administratum's records did not err. Therefore, my interpretation must be flawed. I would investigate physically, inspect the systems myself, find the rational explanation that would restore certainty. Faith required trust, and trust required evidence. I would find the evidence. Sub-level epsilon occupied the lowest habitable section of Hive Tertius, deep enough that the temperature rose from geothermal heat, humid and oppressive after the cold maintenance corridors. The atmospheric processors here were older, their machine, spirits more temperamental, requiring constant attention. The population density pressed tighter, HAB cells stacked vertically in towers that extended into darkness above. I had been here before, performed routine maintenance, but never investigated anomalies. I started at Processing Station Epsilon Prime, the primary oxygen distribution hub for this level. The station occupied a vaulted chamber carved from the hive's foundation rock, machinery ancient enough that sacred oil stains had darkened the stone floor black. The tech priest overseeing this station was Adept Varus, a hunched figure whose back had fused into permanent curvature from decades of bending over control panels. Coordinator Vex. Varus acknowledged me without looking up from his instrumentation. Your presence is unexpected. Atmospheric consumption anomaly, I explained. 7% excess oxygen usage. I'm inspecting systems to locate the discrepancy. Varus's hands paused over his controls. A brief hesitation, barely noticeable. AL systems function within tolerances. I don't doubt your maintenance, I said carefully. But the consumption logs indicate usage exceeding population metrics. Could there be unreported population growth? The census is the administratum's responsibility. Varus resumed his work, fingers adjusting valves with practiced precision. I maintain machines. Population accounting falls outside my purview. The deflection felt strange. Tech priests took pride in the accuracy of their data. Varus should have been as troubled by the discrepancy as I was. Instead, he seemed eager to redirect my attention elsewhere. I spent 3 hours inspecting Epsilon Prime systems. Every measurement confirmed proper function. Oxygen mixed correctly. Pressure maintained. Distribution flowing to scheduled sectors. Yet the consumption meters told their undeniable truth. 7% more oxygen left this station than the population required. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a secondary distribution pipe I hadn't examined. It branched from the main oxygen line, descending into the floor with older connections, suggesting it had been installed long after the primary system. The pipe wasn't marked on my station schematics. Where does this line run? I asked Varus, pointing. His hunched back straightened slightly, a motion that seemed to cause pain. Sub-processing. Redundancy system. It's not on my schematics. Old edition. Before your time. Varus turned to face me fully, his augmetic eye clicking as it focused. Coordinator Vex, your thoroughness is admirable. But some systems operate on authority above our station. The engine seers know. The Magi approve. Our duty is maintenance, not interrogation of approved designs. The words should have satisfied me. Should have reminded me of my place in the hierarchy. But they felt like deflection again, like answers designed to stop questions rather than provide truth. I thanked Varus and departed, but the unmarked pipe haunted my thoughts. I returned to Primary Station 7 and accessed construction records for sub-level Epsilon, searching for installation logs that would explain the secondary distribution system. The records showed standard atmospheric processing installation dating to M36, upgrades and repairs logged through subsequent millennia. Nothing about secondary distribution lines. But then I found a maintenance order from 6 months ago. Component replacement, Epsilon atmospheric secondary distribution. Authorization Engineer, Magos Kellen. Classification, Administratum sealed. Administratum sealed meant the work was performed, but details were restricted to higher authority. Not unusual for sensitive equipment or security, critical systems. But atmospheric distribution. Why would oxygen pipes require classification? I sat at my station and stared at the words on my data slate. My training told me to log my findings and forward to Engineer, Tertius Malik, for review. My faith told me to trust that sealed classifications existed for valid reasons. My duty was maintenance, not investigation of authority above my station. But the oxygen consumption numbers didn't lie. 3,000 people worth of air, flowing somewhere for some purpose that required classification and secrecy. I had maintained these systems for 17 years. I knew what normal looked like. This wasn't normal. I spent the next week investigating quietly, carefully, using my legitimate maintenance duties as cover to examine systems throughout sub-level epsilon. I found 2 more unmarked distribution lines, both installed within the last year, both showing oxygen flow that didn't correspond to habitation zones. The pipes descended deeper into the hive foundation, into areas my access credentials didn't cover. I began reviewing historical atmospheric logs, tracking consumption patterns backward through time. The anomalies appeared in cycles. 6 months of normal consumption, then gradual increases over 4 to 5 months, then sudden returns to baseline. The pattern repeated with mechanical regularity, going back 3 years. Each cycle showed the same characteristics: unexplained oxygen consumption, sealed maintenance orders, then normalization. The pattern's precision disturbed me more than random variation would have. Machines develop patterns because they were designed to function cyclically, but atmospheric consumption should vary with population changes, industrial cycles, seasonal factors. This was too regular, too intentional. I started checking population census data against the atmospheric cycles. The census was conducted annually, always in the 3rd month. I pulled records for sub-level epsilon going back 5 years and cross-referenced them with consumption logs. The 3rd year back showed census population of 47,200 souls. The current census showed 42,100. A decrease of 5,100 people over 2 years, attributed to worker transfers and natural attrition. But when I examined the atmospheric consumption data for that period, it told a different story. Baseline oxygen usage had decreased by only 2,300 people worth of consumption. The remaining 2,800 had continued consuming oxygen for 4 months after the census reported them transferred, then vanished from the logs entirely during one of the unexplained consumption spikes. My hands shook as I set down the data slate. The numbers suggested something impossible. The census reported people transferred. The atmospheric logs showed them still breathing. Then they stopped breathing during the same periods when unauthorized oxygen consumption spiked. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the transfer had been delayed and people remained longer than documented. Perhaps the census data entry had errors. Perhaps I was reading the logs incorrectly, seeing patterns that didn't exist, allowing paranoia to corrupt my interpretation. But I had maintained atmospheric systems for 17 years. I knew how to read consumption logs, and these logs told a story I didn't want to understand. I needed to speak with someone who worked population census, someone who could explain the discrepancies. I sent a Vox message to Administratum Office Epsilon 7, requesting clarification on historical population transfers. The response came 3 hours later. Census data is certified accurate. Questioning certified records suggests doubt of imperial administration. Redirect inquiry through proper channels or face disciplinary review. The threat was subtle but clear. I was approaching boundaries I wasn't meant to cross. The proper response would be to file my findings with Engineer Tertius Malik and allow higher authority to investigate. But something stopped me. A growing certainty that forwarding this inquiry would result in it being classified, sealed, forgotten. I had one person I trusted who might speak honestly: Vesa, my fellow maintenance coordinator. We had worked together for 12 years, shared nutrient breaks, covered each other's shifts during sickness. If anyone would listen without immediate reporting, it was her. I found Vesa performing routine maintenance on Scrubber Bank 23, her hands moving with efficient grace as she replaced filter cartridges. She smiled when she saw me, the expression genuine despite exhaustion evident in the lines around her eyes. "Hadrian, you look troubled. Machine spirits giving you difficulty." I checked that we were alone in the maintenance corridor before speaking. "Vesa, have you ever found discrepancies between population census and atmospheric consumption logs?" Her smile faded. Her hands stopped moving. "Why are you asking this?" "Sub-level epsilon. 7% oxygen consumption excess. I've been investigating and the numbers don't match population records." Vesa set down her tools with careful precision. When she looked at me, something in her expression had changed. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. "Hadrian, listen carefully. Some things we maintain without questioning. Some systems operate on authority that exists for reasons above our understanding. The Omnissiah's design includes mysteries we are not meant to comprehend." That's what Adept Varus said. "But Vesa, I've found patterns. Cycles of consumption that correspond to population decreases. People reported as transferred who continue breathing for months, then vanish during oxygen spikes." "Stop." Her voice was sharp, urgent. "Stop investigating this. File your findings and forget them. Trust me, please. You know what's happening." The realization hit me with cold certainty. "You've seen this before." Vesa's eyes glistened. She took my hand, her grip tight enough to hurt. "I had a brother, 12 years ago. He worked manufacturing processing on sub-level Theta. The census reported him transferred to orbital production. But I saw him 2 months later in the Hab district, still living in his cell. I asked him why he wasn't on the orbital facility. He didn't know what I was talking about. Said he'd received no transfer orders." My throat felt tight. What happened to him? 3 weeks later, he was gone. His Hab cell was empty. When I checked with Administratum, they showed me his transfer papers, dated 4 months earlier. They said he must have been confused when I saw him, that stress makes memory unreliable. They asked if I needed psychological evaluation for grief-induced hallucinations. "But you knew you'd seen him." "I knew." Vesa released my hand and returned to her maintenance work, movements mechanical. "I also knew that questioning certified records leads to disciplinary action. That doubt in imperial administration is heresy. That sometimes faith requires accepting what authority tells us, even when our own eyes suggest otherwise." "That's not faith," I said. "That's cowardice." She flinched as if I'd struck her. "Perhaps. But I'm alive. My brother isn't. And I maintain the atmospheric systems that keep 300,000 souls breathing. Which serves the Imperium better? My death for questioning what I cannot change, or my continued service maintaining what I can?" I left her there and walked through the cold maintenance corridors until my legs ached and my breath came in gasps that the atmospheric processors recycled with perfect efficiency. Vesa's story should have terrified me into silence. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. Her brother hadn't been transferred. He had been taken. And the oxygen consumption spikes represented something consuming breath that should have belonged to living people. I needed access to the deeper levels, to wherever those unmarked distribution pipes led. My credentials didn't grant that access. But Engineer Tertius Malik's did, and Malik's authorization codes were stored in the Primary Station 7 system, accessible to maintenance coordinators for emergency repairs. Using those codes without authorization would end my career at minimum, possibly my life. But I had 17 years of flawless service, of absolute precision, of faith that had never wavered. If that faith meant anything, it meant I could trust it to survive truth. I had to believe that discovering what was happening would prove the rational explanation, the justified reason. That would make everything comprehensible again. The following night I accessed Malik's authorization codes and granted myself temporary credentials for sub-level Zeta, the deepest accessible section of Hive Tertius. The credentials would expire in 12 hours and leave a log trace, but 12 hours would be enough. Sub-level Zeta existed below official habitation zones, in caverns that predated the Hive's construction. The air here tasted of stone and ancient moisture, the atmospheric processing minimal. My breath echoed in darkness, barely held back by emergency lighting that had burned for millennia. The temperature climbed toward 28 degrees, heat radiating from the planet's core. I followed the unmarked distribution pipe through winding passages, my data slate providing the only certain illumination. The pipe descended through chambers filled with derelict machinery, past foundations carved by hands dead for 10,000 years, into spaces that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The pipe terminated in a chamber that made me stop breathing for 3 full seconds. The space had been a natural cavern once, expanded and shaped by human labor into something between cathedral and abattoir. Atmospheric processors filled the walls, newer equipment installed among ancient stone, creating a hybrid of technology and geology that felt obscene. But it was the chamber's contents that drove ice through my chest. Rows of medical slabs extended into darkness beyond my light's reach, each one occupied by a human figure restrained with metal bands. Tubes connected to their faces, feeding oxygen directly into their lungs. Monitoring equipment tracked vital signs with clinical precision. And above each slab, inscribed in High Gothic, was a number and a date. I approached the nearest slab with legs that threatened to collapse. The figure restrained there was male, approximately 40 years old, unconscious but breathing steadily. The oxygen tube inserted into his throat showed condensation with each breath. The number above him read 774. The date was 6 months ago. I checked the next slab. Female, younger, same configuration. Number 7735. Same date. The next row showed older dates, going back months. I walked through the rows in growing horror, counting. Approximately 3,000 slabs. 3,000 people breathing, consuming oxygen in unexplained quantities, stored in darkness below the hive. My data slate nearly slipped from shaking hands. I accessed the administratum census records for sub-level Epsilon and cross-referenced the numbers. Subject 7734, Marcus Thren. Manufacturum worker, reported transferred to orbital facility 6 months ago. Subject 7735, Anna Vex. My sister's name was Vesa Vex. Anna would be her younger sister, who had transferred 5 months ago, whom Vesa had mentioned during nutrient break, whom she'd said was doing well on the orbital platforms. I ran to that slab and stared at the face beneath the oxygen tube. I had met Anna twice, remembered her laughing at Vesa's stories about my meticulousness. The woman on the slab looked thinner, paler, but it was her, breathing, alive. Not transferred, stored. The sound that came from my throat was not human. I grabbed the oxygen tube, ready to tear it free, to wake her, to break the restraints and carry her back to light and truth. But my hand stopped, because removing the tube would kill her. Because waking her here, alone, surrounded by 3,000 sleeping prisoners, would accomplish nothing except adding my slab to the collection. I forced myself to think, to investigate, to understand before acting. I examined the monitoring equipment, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The vital signs showed induced medical coma, maintained at precise levels. The atmospheric support was sophisticated, perfectly calibrated. Someone had designed this system with the same care I brought to my own maintenance work. At the chamber's far end I found a control station, ancient but functional. A data slate rested on the console, unlocked. I accessed it with trembling fingers and found logs that explained everything I had refused to understand. Administratum Population Management Protocol, Level Epsilon. Quota System for Workforce Optimization. When census population exceeds optimal density thresholds, excess workers are designated for storage pending future resource requirements. Storage maintains workforce viability while reducing immediate resource strain. Designation as transferred prevents social destabilization among remaining population. Recovery and reintegration occurs when economic conditions warrant increased labor capacity. I read it 3 times. The words were Imperial Gothic. The meaning was clear, but my mind rejected it like contaminated input. This wasn't corruption or heresy or failure of the Emperor's law. This was policy, documented, approved. A quota system for human storage, as if people were components to be warehoused until needed. The data, slate contained execution logs, going back 3 years, matching the atmospheric consumption cycles I had identified. Each cycle followed the same pattern: census conducted, excess population identified, workers designated for storage, families told of transfers that never happened. 3,000 people at a time, breathing in darkness, while their loved ones believed them employed on distant facilities. Further logs showed recovery protocols. When manufacturing production increased or mining operations expanded, workers were retrieved from storage, awakened, and their memories adjusted using conditioning to believe they had actually been transferred and worked on orbital platforms. The conditioning included false memories of their time away, details specific enough to satisfy curious family members. Some workers had been stored and recovered multiple times, cycled through the system like reusable components. Others had been in storage for years, waiting for economic conditions that might never arrive. A few logs showed workers dying in storage from complications, their bodies processed through standard mortuary channels. Families informed of industrial accidents on facilities they had never reached. The clinical language made it worse. Subject 7734 expired due to respiratory complications. Asset loss calculated at 0.003% of stored workforce. Within acceptable parameters. Marcus Thren, reduced to a decimal in an efficiency calculation. I don't know how long I stood there reading. Long enough that my legs cramped. Long enough that thirst made my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. Long enough that the data slate's horrifying precision burned itself into my memory with perfect fidelity. A sound behind me shattered my paralysis. I spun to see Engineer Tertius Malik standing at the chamber entrance, his augmetic eyes glowing red in the darkness. He had followed me. Or perhaps my credentials usage had triggered immediate alert. It didn't matter which. Coordinator Vex. His Vox grill voice echoed in the cavern. I had hoped you would file your findings and trust in higher authority. I couldn't speak. Couldn't form words that would make sense of this. Malik moved into the chamber with his mechanical precision, pistons hissing softly. He glanced at the rows of medical slabs without emotion. You are thorough, as I noted. Thorough enough to discover what most maintenance coordinators accept without investigation. Now you must decide what to do with this knowledge. You know. My voice came out broken. You've always known. Of course. Malik approached the control station and studied the data, slate I'd been reading. I designed the atmospheric distribution system for this chamber, calibrated the oxygen flow to maintain 3,000 subjects simultaneously. The work was technically challenging and spiritually satisfying. The omniscia's efficiency made manifest. The casual admission drove nausea through my gut. These are people, not components, not assets. People with families who believe they're alive and working and safe. They are alive. They are working, in the sense that they fulfill economic function through strategic absence. and they are safer in storage than they would be in overpopulated habs where resource strain breeds violence and heresy. Malik's augmetic eyes focused on me. You are reacting emotionally rather than logically. This is the weakness of flesh untempered by sacred augmentation. This is slavery. This is kidnapping. This is 3,000 people stolen from their lives and imprisoned in darkness while their families are told lies. This is resource management. Malik's voice remained level, mechanical. Sub-level Epsilon's optimal population density is 39,000 souls. Beyond that threshold, atmospheric strain increases. Nutritional distribution becomes inefficient. Cell overcrowding breeds disease and social instability. The administratum determined that maintaining population at optimal levels prevents greater suffering. Would you prefer we execute excess workers instead, or allow overpopulation to trigger the violence and starvation that inevitably results? The logic was sound. The logic was monstrous. Both things were true simultaneously. They don't consent? I said. You don't ask them. You designate them like components and warehouse them like equipment. Consent is a luxury civilizations afford when resources are abundant and threats are distant. Malik gestured toward the chamber's exit, toward the hive above. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds, holds back darkness on 10,000 fronts, maintains humanity's survival against extinction, level threats that would shatter lesser civilizations. Do you believe such an empire functions on individual consent? On personal preference? On the luxury of choice? The Emperor protects, I whispered. We're taught he watches over humanity, that imperial law serves his will. The Emperor protects those who are strong enough to survive his protection. Malik's mechanical hand touched one of the medical slabs gently, almost reverently. I have served the Omnissiah for 143 years. I have witnessed worlds burn to prevent heresy's spread. I have calculated resource allocations that condemned millions to starvation to save billions from invasion. I have made choices that haunt my every meditation, prayers that feel like blasphemy even as I speak them. His hand was shaking. The motion was slight, barely visible, but I saw it. The great engineer, Tertius, augmented and ancient and absolutely certain, had a hand that trembled when he spoke of his choices. I don't know if this is right, Malik continued, his voice dropping to barely above whisper. I have never known. I ran calculations proving that population storage prevents resource collapse. I designed systems that maintain life rather than ending it. I chose the option that preserves the most souls with the least permanent harm. But at night, in my charging cycles, I dream of the faces I have designated. I wonder if the Emperor would approve. I wonder if he even notices the mechanisms we build in his name. The admission shattered something in my chest. I had expected evil, cartoonish villainy, someone I could hate cleanly. Instead, I found exhaustion, uncertainty, and a rationale that almost made sense even as it violated everything I believed the Imperium should be. How many, I ask, how many hives use this system? I designed atmospheric systems for 73 hive facilities across this subsector. 51 include population storage components. Malik released the medical slab and turned to face me fully. Coordinator Vex, you now possess knowledge that places you at a crossroads. You may accept what you have learned and continue your service with eyes open to the Imperium's necessities, or you may reject it and face the consequences of that rejection. What consequences? If you report this to authorities outside the administratum chain that approved it, you will be detained for investigation. Your findings will be classified. You will likely be mined, wiped and reassigned to menial labor. Your memories of this discovery erased, along with everything else that makes you yourself. If you speak publicly about what you've found, You will be executed for spreading sedition and undermining imperial morale. If you attempt to free these subjects, you will fail and be killed immediately. Each option was carefully articulated, clinically delivered, and absolutely certain. Malik had seen others reach this crossroads before. What if I accept it? The question felt like betrayal even as I asked. What if I return to my duties and pretend I never came here? Then you become what I am, a functionary who maintains the machinery of humanity's survival while questioning whether survival at this cost is worth preserving. Malik's augmetic eyes dimmed slightly. You will perform your duties with perfect precision. You will train new maintenance coordinators. You will eventually be offered augmentation and higher station. And every time you calibrate atmospheric systems, you will know that somewhere below, people breathe in darkness because your technical expertise keeps them alive in storage. That's not a choice. That's complicity. Yes, Malik nodded slowly, but complicity that maintains rather than destroys. Complicity that allows Aina Vex to breathe, to potentially wake someday when economic conditions improve, rather than being executed or left to suffocate in overcrowded habs. Is that not preferable to the alternatives? I looked at my sister's younger sibling, breathing steadily under chemical coma, stored like equipment in darkness she would never remember. Vesa believed Ina was working on orbital platforms, sending Vox messages monthly that were fabricated by administratum personnel. The deception was complete, carefully maintained, technically perfect. And it was evil. It was evil even if the alternative was worse. It was evil even if the rationale was sound. It was evil because it treated people as resources to be allocated rather than souls to be respected. The Imperium I had believed in would never do this, but the Imperium I had believed in was a fantasy I had maintained through 17 years of willful ignorance. I can't, I said finally. I can't accept this and continue pretending I serve something righteous. Malik nodded as if he'd expected this answer. Then what will you do? What could I do? I couldn't free 3,000 people and escape. I couldn't report to authorities who had approved this system. I couldn't even tell Vesa the truth without destroying her and accomplishing nothing. My technical expertise meant nothing here. My faith had shattered. My duty had become complicity. All I had left was witness. The truth, preserved and spoken, even if no one with power to change things would hear it. I'll document everything, I said. I'll create a record that can't be classified or destroyed, and I'll make sure someone finds it eventually. That changes nothing. The system continues regardless of documentation. Perhaps, but silence is also a choice. If I return to my maintenance duties and say nothing, I become part of the machinery that swallows people and tells their families lies. At least documentation preserves truth, even if it can't preserve justice. Malik studied me for a long moment, augmetic eyes clicking as they refocused. I had a friend once, 107 years ago, Magos Theron, brilliant mind, beautiful faith. He discovered something similar to what you've found in a different context. He made the same choice you're making. They executed him 3 days later. His documentation was classified. His name was struck from records. Nothing changed except that the Mechanicus lost a skilled priest and I lost someone who understood my doubts. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died with his conscience intact. I have lived a century longer with mine corroded. Malik gestured toward the chamber exit. Go. Coordinator Vex. Create your documentation. Speak your truth. I will not stop you or report you immediately, but know that others will. The Administratum has protocols for this scenario. You have perhaps 12 hours before your credentials usage triggers investigative response. Why help me? Even this much? Malik's mechanical hand touched his chest, over where his heart had once been. Because I remember what faith felt like before I understood what maintaining it required. Because Magos Theron deserved someone to witness his choice, even if I lacked courage to join him. Because perhaps the Omniseia judges us not by the systems we maintain, but by the moments we choose truth over efficiency. I left that chamber of breathing prisoners and climbed back toward the light. My data, slate full of evidence that would convince no one with authority to act. I spent the next 6 hours compiling everything I'd found. Atmospheric logs showing consumption patterns, census data revealing population discrepancies, construction records of unauthorized distribution systems, photographs of the storage chamber, copies of the protocol documents explaining population management procedures. I encrypted the files and prepared 7 copies on separate data cores, hiding them in maintenance stations throughout Hive Tertius where they might survive administrative purges. Then I wrote this testimony, this narrative of transformation from faith to comprehension, from certainty to witness. The arbits came for me at the beginning of the 14th hour. I was at Primary Station 7, performing routine maintenance on atmospheric monitors, my hands steady despite knowing what approached. The servitor Theta noticed them first, augmetic eyes clicking toward the corridor entrance. 3 enforcers in black carapace armor, shock mauls mag locked to their belts, faces hidden behind helmet visors that reflected my image back at me. Hadrian Vex, Life Support Maintenance Coordinator, the lead enforcer stated, not asked. You are detained pending investigation into unauthorized access of restricted facilities and potential seditious data distribution. Compliance is mandatory. I set down my tools with the same precision I had brought to 17 years of service. I pressed my fist to my chest in the sign of the cog one final time, speaking the prayer of completion I had recited at the end of each shift. The Omniscia's work is never finished, but this servant's portion is complete. They took me to Precinct Fortress Tertius, processed me through intake procedures with bureaucratic efficiency that would have made me proud once. Biometric scan, credential verification, charge documentation, everything logged, time-stamped, filed according to protocol. The Imperium functioned through paperwork, even when that function was destroying lives. The interrogation chamber was 14 degrees, cold as the maintenance corridors I would never walk again. The interrogator was a woman named Helen, Arbeits rank of proctor, investigator, whose eyes held the same exhaustion I had seen in Malik's augmetic lenses. She displayed my crimes on a picked screen, unauthorized credentials usage, access of classified facilities, data extraction, potential sedition. Why did you do this? Coordinator Vex. Her voice carried genuine curiosity beneath professional detachment. Because I found people stolen from their lives and stored in darkness while their families were told lies. Because the consumption logs showed patterns I couldn't ignore. Because I had faith that the Imperium served the Emperor's will, and I needed to understand how this served anything except convenience. Helen nodded slowly, as if this answer was familiar. You found the population management facility. You reviewed the protocols. You understand now that this system prevents resource collapse and maintains order. Why could you not accept this knowledge and continue your service? Because acceptance would make me complicit. Because maintaining atmospheric systems that keep prisoners breathing in storage chambers is not service to the Emperor. It's service to a machine that consumes its own people for efficiency calculations. The alternative is executing excess population or allowing overcrowding to breed violence. Helen leaned forward, her scarred hands flat on the interrogation table. You worked life support systems. You know what happens when populations exceed atmospheric capacity. Slow suffocation, panic, murder over breathable air. Is storage not more merciful than that? Mercy would be expanding atmospheric capacity, increasing resource allocation, finding solutions that don't require warehousing people like components. With what resources? Helen's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her professional mask. This hive supports 3 million souls on infrastructure built for 2 million 10,000 years ago. The Mechanicus requests for expansion funding have been denied for 6 centuries because this sector faces orcish invasions that require fleet construction. The administratum has calculated that population storage costs 0.007% of execution processing and prevents the social instability that execution quotas generate. These are not evil calculations. These are survival calculations. Survival at what cost? I met her eyes and saw my own doubts reflected there. If we become the thing that treats humanity as assets to be warehoused, as problems to be efficiently managed, then what are we surviving for? What distinguishes us from the Xenos we fight, from the heretics we burn, if our response to resource limitations is to imprison our own people and lie to their families? Helen was silent for 17 seconds. I counted them. Then she stood and turned away from me, hands clasped behind her back. I have investigated 47 cases like yours over my 23 years of service. Tech priests who discovered population storage. Administratum clerks who found evidence of quotas. Medicae who recognized patients who should not exist. All of them asked variations of your question. All of them faced the same choice you face. What happened to them? 39 accepted official explanation and returned to their duties with amended security clearances. They serve the Imperium still, maintaining the systems that preserve order. 7 chose execution rather than complicity. 1 chose mind, wiping and reassignment to menial service, losing everything they were to preserve some fragment of conscience they would not remember possessing. 39 chose complicity. 7 chose death. 1 chose erasure, the mathematics of conscience under imperial efficiency. Which do you recommend? I asked. Helen turned back to face me, and I saw tears tracking down scarred cheeks. I don't know. I have never known. I enforce imperial law because someone must. I investigate sedition because collapse threatens more lives than order costs. But I dream of the 7 who chose execution, and I wonder if they sleep better than I do. I wonder if the Emperor judges us by the systems we maintain or by the moments we choose truth over survival. The same words Malik had spoken, the same exhaustion, the same doubt that came from understanding the machinery too completely to maintain simple faith. I choose truth, I said. I cannot return to maintaining atmospheric systems, knowing what those systems support. I cannot tell Vesa her sister is safe on orbital platforms, while Aina breathes in darkness below us. I cannot file reports that pretend 3,000 people are transferred when they are imprisoned. I would rather die than become the lie. Helen nodded, wiping tears with hands that had probably signed execution warrants for people, asking the same questions I asked. Then truth it is. The administratum will classify your documentation regardless. Your data cores will be recovered and destroyed. Your testimony will be sealed. But you will die knowing you refuse to be the machinery that swallows people. That counts for something, even if it changes nothing. Does it ever change? I asked. 47 cases, 7 executions. Did any of them change the system? No. The word fell like a hammer. The system is too large, too necessary, too embedded in the Imperium's survival calculations. Population storage exists on 73 worlds in this subsector alone. Thousands more across the segmentum. Millions of people breathing in darkness, their families believing comfortable lies, all of it documented and approved and necessary to prevent resource collapse. One maintenance coordinator cannot change that. 47 cannot. Perhaps even the Emperor could not change it now without triggering the cascading failures that would doom us all. The scope of it crushed the breath from my lungs. Not corruption, not heresy, not failure of a few administrators. Systematic. Systemic. A fundamental methodology for maintaining the Imperium's population within manageable parameters, deployed across thousands of worlds, approved by authorities that traced their lineage to the Emperor's own administratum. Then what was the point? The question emerged broken. What did my faith mean if this is what it served? What does any of our service mean if the thing we maintain treats us as components to be warehoused? Helen sat back down across from me, her scarred hands reaching across the interrogation table to grasp mine. The gesture violated protocol. The gesture was human in a way that made it precious. The point is witness, she said softly. The point is that someone knows. Someone saw. Someone refused to pretend. When the Imperium finally collapses under the weight of its own machinery, when future humans sift through our ruins and wonder what we were, your testimony will exist. 7 data cores hidden in maintenance stations. This interrogation log that I will not fully redact. Fragments of truth preserved in the infinite archives, waiting for someone who cares enough to find them. That's not enough. No, it isn't, but it's what we have. Helen released my hands and returned to professional detachment. Hadrian Vex, you are found guilty of seditious documentation and unauthorized disclosure of classified protocols. The sentence is execution by atmospheric deprivation, to be carried out immediately. Do you have final testimony for the record? The irony was not lost on me. Executed by the systems I had maintained. Suffocated by atmospheric manipulation, the same methodology I had perfected over 17 years. Turned into the same statistical loss as Marcus Thren, subject expired. Asset loss calculated at acceptable parameters. I want it recorded that I die believing the Imperium betrayed its own principles. That population storage is not resource management, but systematic imprisonment. That the Emperor, if he still watches, would not approve of what we have become in his name. And I want Vesa Vex informed that her sister Ina is alive, but imprisoned, so that someone who loves her knows the truth. Helen's hands shook as she transcribed my words onto official record. Noted, though I suspect the administratum will redact most of that before archival. Suspect or no? No. A sad smile. But I file it anyway. Witness, Coordinator Vex. Someone must witness. They took me to an execution chamber that was, appropriately, a sealed atmospheric cell. The mechanism was simple oxygen extraction until consciousness faded, then complete atmospheric removal. Clean, efficient. The body could be processed through standard mortuary procedures, and families informed of industrial accidents or transfer complications. I was the only one scheduled for execution that day. The chamber was cold, 14 degrees. Familiar temperature that almost felt like comfort. A viewing window showed the corridor, outside where Helen stood. Her face unreadable behind professional detachment that couldn't quite hide the tears. The atmospheric extraction began at exactly the beginning of the 15th hour. I felt oxygen thinning, my breath coming faster to compensate the physiological response I had studied in maintenance manuals but never experienced. My vision tunneled. My thoughts scattered. My hands, steady through 17 years of service, trembled as they reached for an oxygen distribution valve that didn't exist in this sealed cell. In those final moments, my mind fixed on strange details. The temperature reading displayed on the chamber's control panel, 14.3 degrees. The slight vibration of atmospheric processors cycling somewhere in the walls. The fact that someone would need to maintain these systems after I died, and whether they would know what they maintained or accept comfortable ignorance. I thought of Inavex, breathing in darkness, her consciousness suspended in chemical dreams while her sister mourned a transfer that never happened. I thought of Vesa, who had chosen complicity over truth, who would continue her service, maintaining atmospheric systems, who would perhaps find one of my hidden data cores someday and face the same choice I had faced. I thought of Engineer Tertius Malik, who had designed 73 population storage systems across the subsector, who dreamed of faces he had designated, who had helped me document truth even knowing it would change nothing. I thought of Proctor, Investigator Helen, who had investigated 47 cases like mine, who cried while signing execution warrants, who filed testimony she knew would be redacted because witness mattered even when it was futile. And I thought of the Imperium itself, vast and terrible and necessary, grinding forward across 10,000 years and 1,000,000 worlds, consuming its own people as fuel for survival, justified by threats so extreme that any cost seemed acceptable. I thought of the Emperor, enthroned in golden stasis, watching or not watching, approving or not approving, divine or simply dead and deified by an empire that needed something, an absolute, to justify its absolute methods. Darkness crept across my vision like ash falling from processional fires. My last conscious thought was a question I would never answer. If faith requires accepting comfortable lies, and truth requires dying for futile testimony, what does conscience choose when both options serve nothing except witness? I am dead now. I have been dead for however long it takes for you to find this testimony, hidden in maintenance stations throughout Hive Tertius on data, cores encrypted with protocols I learned over 17 years of faithful service. If you are reading this, you have access credentials that suggest technical expertise or investigative authority. You have found documentation of population storage systems. You face the same choice I faced. I cannot tell you which choice is right. I chose execution over complicity, and perhaps that was pride rather than conscience, performance rather than principle. 39 others chose service, and perhaps they saved more lives through continued maintenance than I saved through documented protest. 7 chose death, and perhaps we are simply too weak to bear the weight of knowledge. 1 chose erasure, and perhaps that was wisest, preserving conscience by destroying the consciousness that would have to live with compromise. What I can tell you is this: the system is real. Population storage facilities exist throughout the Imperium, approved by administrative authority that traces to the highest levels. Millions of people breathe in darkness while their families believe comfortable lies. This is not corruption. This is policy. This is what the Imperium has become in its pursuit of survival. You who read this have 3 options. You can accept what you have learned and continue your service with eyes open to the machinery you maintain. You can reject it and face execution, mind wiping, or exile. You can ignore it and delete this testimony, returning to comfortable ignorance that preserves both life and sanity. I will not tell you which to choose. I am dead and my choice is complete. But I will tell you this: whatever you choose, know that someone before you chose truth. Know that Hadrian Vex, Life Support Maintenance Coordinator, served the Omnissiah for 17 years with perfect faith until that faith was tested against truth. Know that he found people imprisoned in darkness and refused to pretend it was necessary just because it was efficient. Know that he died believing the Imperium could be better than this, even if evidence suggested otherwise. Know that he preserved testimony because witness matters, even when witness changes nothing. Know that somewhere in the infinite archives, fragments of truth wait for someone who cares enough to find them, someone who might have the power or courage or wisdom to choose differently than he did. The atmospheric processors will continue their eternal hymn. The oxygen will flow to 300,000 souls in Hive Tertius, and to 3,000 more breathing in darkness below. The maintenance coordinators will check filters and calibrate mixture chambers and recite their prayers to the Omniscia. The census will report population within optimal parameters. The families will receive Vox messages from loved ones on distant orbital facilities. And the system will continue, vast and terrible and necessary, consuming its own people as fuel for survival, justified by threats that make any cost seem acceptable. I do not know if the Emperor protects. I no longer know if he watches or cares or even existed as we believe. But I know that Hadrian Vex tried to serve something worth protecting, and when that service became complicity in systematic imprisonment, he chose truth over survival. Make of that what you will. Choose what your conscience demands. Maintain what you can bear to maintain. But do not pretend you do not know. Do not accept comfortable lies when truth is documented and preserved. Do not become the machinery that swallows people and tells their families lies. Someone must witness. Someone must remember. Someone must choose truth even when truth changes nothing. I was that someone. Perhaps you will be too. The Omniscia's work is never finished, but this servant's portion is complete. The atmospheric processors hum their eternal hymn. The oxygen flows, and somewhere in the darkness, 3,000 people breathe and dream, waiting for someone to remember they exist. Remember them. Remember me. Remember that we deserved better than efficient imprisonment. Remember that survival at any cost is not the same as survival worth having. Remember, and choose accordingly. This testimony is complete. This witness is ended. This life is finished. May the Emperor protect what I could not. May someone find this who has courage I lacked. May the truth preserved here mean something beyond my death. I am Hadrian Vex. I served faithfully until faith required complicity. I chose truth over survival. I died believing it mattered. I hope I was right.